The Silent Witness. Let's dive into the first two chapters of The Silent Witness. Chapter 1. The crime scene. The rain came down in sheets, drumming against the hood of Detective Marcus Kane's car as he pulled up to the scene. The red and blue lights of the patrol cars reflected off the slick pavement, casting an eerie glow on the otherwise dark and quiet suburban street. It was well past midnight, and the neighborhood was silent, save for the murmur of officers exchanging details of the gruesome discovery. Marcus stepped out, pulling his trench coat tighter against the chill. He was a tall man with a grizzled face that spoke of too many late nights and far too many bodies. The last thing he wanted was another murder on his desk, especially one that came with complications. But the call had been urgent. This was no ordinary case. Detective Kane? A young officer approached him, her face pale under the harsh lights. "You're going to want to see this." Marcus nodded, his jaw tightening as he followed her up the driveway. The house was a modest two-story, the kind you'd expect to see in a neighborhood like this. The front door hung open, the wood splintered as if someone had forced their way inside. His pulse quickened. Forced entry usually meant violence. Inside, the scene was worse than he'd imagined. The living room was a mess. Furniture overturned, broken glass littering the floor. Blood spattered the walls, telling the story of a violent struggle. But it was the body in the middle of the room that demanded his full attention. A man in his mid-40s lay sprawled on the carpet, his eyes wide open in a frozen expression of terror. His throat had been slashed, the wound deep and jagged, almost as if the killer had taken pleasure in the act. Marcus had seen his share of corpses, but something about this one unsettled him. There was a brutality here that felt personal, calculated. "Who found the body?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite the churn in his stomach. "The neighbors," the officer replied, glancing at her notepad. "They heard screaming, then nothing. Called it in immediately." Marcus moved closer to the body, kneeling to get a better look. "Anyone else in the house?" The officer hesitated, her gaze shifting toward the stairs. "Yes, sir. There's a child. A little girl. She was found hiding in a closet upstairs." Marcus looked up sharply. "Is she hurt?" "Physically, no. But," the officer swallowed hard, "she hasn't said a word. We think she might be in shock." A silent witness. The most fragile kind, Marcus thought grimly. He stood, his mind already racing through the possibilities. A child who had seen something so horrific but couldn't, or wouldn't, speak. It was going to be one of those cases. "Where is she now?" he asked, already moving toward the stairs. "Upstairs in one of the bedrooms. We've got a social worker with her, trying to calm her down." Marcus nodded, taking the steps two at a time. His boots left wet prints on the carpet as he made his way to the room. The door was slightly ajar, and he could hear the soft murmur of a woman's voice from inside. He pushed the door open gently and stepped into the room. It was a little girl's bedroom, filled with the usual trappings of childhood: stuffed animals, pastel-colored walls, a small bed with a pink comforter. But all that seemed out of place now, overshadowed by the horror that had invaded this innocent space. In the corner of the room, sitting on the floor with her knees drawn up to her chest, was the girl. She couldn't have been more than 6 years old, with dark hair that fell in messy tangles around her face. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, staring off into the distance as if trapped in some terrible memory. The social worker looked up as Marcus entered, her expression one of deep concern. "She hasn't spoken since we found her," she said quietly. "Not a single word." Marcus knelt down beside the girl, careful not to startle her. "Hey there," he said softly, trying to catch her gaze. "My name's Marcus. I'm here to help." The girl didn't respond. She didn't even blink. Marcus felt a pang in his chest. He had seen this kind of trauma before, victims so paralyzed by fear that their minds shut down completely. But he also knew that somewhere deep inside, this little girl held the key to everything. She was the only witness to the murder, the only one who could tell him what happened. Chapter 2. The Silent Witness. Marcus sat on the edge of the girl's bed, his mind racing as he tried to figure out his next move. He knew that pushing the child too hard could cause her to retreat further into silence, but he also understood the urgency of the situation. Every minute that passed was a minute lost in the search for the killer. He glanced at the social worker, who was still kneeling beside the girl, her face etched with empathy. "What's her name?" Marcus asked quietly. "Lila," the social worker replied. "She's 6 years old. Her mother passed away last year, and she's been living with her father since." Marcus looked back at Lila, his heart aching for the little girl. Losing a mother at such a young age was a tragedy in itself, but to witness her father's brutal murder on top of that? It was more than any child should have to bear. He took a deep breath and leaned forward, trying to make his voice as gentle as possible. "Lila, I know you're scared, but I need your help. Did you see who hurt your daddy?" Lila's eyes flickered, a tiny movement that Marcus almost missed. It was the first sign of life she'd shown since he entered the room. He felt a glimmer of hope. Maybe she could hear him, maybe she was still connected to the world outside her trauma. "It's okay, Lila," he continued softly. "You don't have to be afraid anymore. We're going to keep you safe, I promise." The social worker reached out and gently touched Lila's arm. "Lila, honey, can you try to tell us what happened? Anything at all?" For a moment it seemed like Lila might respond. Her lips parted slightly and Marcus held his breath, praying for even a single word. But then her eyes glazed over again, and she sank deeper into herself, retreating to that unreachable place in her mind. Marcus felt the frustration building inside him, but he forced himself to remain calm. This wasn't going to be easy. It never was. He stood up, motioning for the social worker to follow him out of the room. Once they were in the hallway, he closed the door softly behind them. "I need to know everything about her," Marcus said, his voice firm. "Who her friends are, if she has any family nearby, what her relationship with her father was like. Everything." The social worker nodded. "I'll start gathering information. But detective, if she doesn't start talking soon, we might need to bring in a specialist. Someone who's trained to deal with children in situations like this." Marcus ran a hand through his hair, nodding absently. He knew she was right. But the thought of handing Lila over to someone else made his skin crawl. This case had already gotten under his skin, and he wasn't about to let it slip through his fingers. "I'll stay with her for now," Marcus said. "See if I can build some trust." The social worker hesitated. "Are you sure? It might be better if she—" "I'm sure," Marcus interrupted, his tone leaving no room for argument. "This girl saw something. And until we know what that is, she's our best shot at catching the person who did this." The social worker nodded reluctantly, then turned and walked away, leaving Marcus alone in the hallway. He stood there for a moment, staring at the closed door, his mind churning with questions. Who had killed Lila's father and why? Was it a random act of violence or something more personal? And most importantly, what had Lila seen? The answers were locked inside her, buried under layers of trauma and fear. Marcus knew he had to find a way to reach her. But how do you coax a child out of silence when the only thing waiting for them is the memory of a nightmare? He didn't have an answer. Not yet. But he was determined to find one. Excellent. Let's continue with the next 2 chapters of A Testimonia Silenciosa. Chapter 3. The Whispering Shadows. The first rays of dawn were creeping through the curtains when Marcus finally left Lila's side. He had spent the entire night in the small bedroom, sitting in silence as the girl slept fitfully on her bed. Every time she stirred, her face contorted with fear, Marcus felt a pang of helplessness. He knew he couldn't protect her from her own mind, from the horrors she'd witnessed. As he descended the stairs, the house was still humming with activity. Forensics had arrived in the early hours, and the once chaotic scene was now being meticulously combed for evidence. Officers spoke in low tones, their voices blending with the steady hum of equipment. Detective Kate Rodriguez, Marcus's partner, was standing in the living room, reviewing photos of the crime scene. She was a sharp, no-nonsense detective with a keen eye for details, and Marcus trusted her instincts more than anyone's. "Rough night?" she asked without looking up as Marcus approached. "You could say that," Marcus replied, rubbing the back of his neck. "Any leads?" Kate sighed and handed him a stack of photos. "Not much. The murder weapon is missing, likely taken by the killer. No signs of forced entry other than the front door, which suggests he might have been let in or had a key. But here's the thing, there's no evidence of theft. Nothing valuable was taken. Marcus frowned as he flipped through the photos. So it wasn't a robbery gone wrong. This was targeted. Looks that way. The brutality of the attack suggests a lot of rage. Whoever did this wanted to make the victim suffer. Marcus studied the photos closely, his mind racing through possible scenarios. What do we know about the victim? Kate pulled out her notepad and flipped it open. James Harmon, 44 years old, worked as a financial consultant. No criminal record, no known enemies. Neighbors say he was a quiet guy, kept to himself after his wife died. No signs of any recent disputes or trouble. So why him? Marcus muttered, more to himself than to Kate. What made him a target? That's the million-dollar question, Kate said. We're digging into his finances, his work, looking for anything that might point to a motive. But so far it's a dead end. Marcus's thoughts drifted back to Lila, the silent witness who held the key to everything. We need to figure out what Lila saw, he said quietly. She's the only one who can tell us what happened here. Kate nodded, her expression softening slightly. How is she? Terrified, Marcus replied, his voice heavy with concern. She hasn't spoken a word since we found her. I'm worried she's too traumatized to ever talk about it. Have you thought about bringing in a child psychologist? Kate asked, her tone gentle but insistent. Someone who can help her feel safe enough to open up? I know, Marcus admitted, rubbing his temples. But I want to try a different approach first. I'm going to visit her school, talk to her teachers, see if I can find out more about her life. Maybe there's someone she trusts enough to break through to her. Kate gave him a skeptical look but didn't argue. Just be careful, Marcus. I know how you get when a case hits close to home. Marcus managed a half smile. I'll be fine. I just want to find out who did this and why. With that, he handed the photos back to Kate and headed toward the front door. Outside, the sky was brightening, the early morning light casting long shadows across the street. Marcus felt the weight of the night pressing down on him, but he pushed it aside. He had a job to do. As he started the car, his phone buzzed in his pocket. He pulled it out and saw a text from the social worker. Lila is awake. She's asking for you. Marcus's heart skipped a beat. It was the first sign that Lila might be willing to communicate, even if just a little. He quickly texted back that he was on his way and sped toward the address where she was being cared for. When he arrived, the social worker was waiting for him outside, her expression a mix of hope and concern. She's been asking for you, she said as Marcus approached. But she still hasn't spoken. Just pointed at the door when she woke up. Where is she now? Marcus asked, already moving toward the house. In the living room. She's sitting by the window looking outside. Marcus entered the house quietly, his footsteps muffled by the thick carpet. As he stepped into the living room, he saw Lila sitting on a cushioned chair, her small frame dwarfed by the furniture around her. She was staring out the window, her eyes distant but alert. Hey Lila, Marcus said softly as he approached. I'm here. How are you feeling? Lila didn't turn to look at him, but her eyes shifted slightly, acknowledging his presence. It wasn't much, but it was something. Marcus sat down on the edge of the couch, not too close but close enough to show he was there for her. It's okay, Lila. You don't have to say anything if you don't want to. I just want to be here with you. For a long time they sat in silence. Marcus kept his gaze steady, letting Lila take her time. Eventually she reached into her pocket and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. She held it tightly in her hand as if unsure whether to give it to him. Marcus waited patiently, his heart pounding in his chest. Finally, Lila extended her hand, offering the paper to him. Marcus took it gently and unfolded it. His breath caught in his throat as he saw what was drawn on the paper. It was a crude, childlike sketch of a figure, a shadowy figure with red eyes standing over a bed. And in the corner of the page, written in shaky, barely legible letters, was a single word: monster. Chapter 4. Hidden Truths. Marcus's hands trembled slightly as he held the drawing, his mind reeling. The image was simplistic, but it conveyed a chilling message. Lila had seen something, someone, who terrified her beyond words. And now she had finally found a way to communicate that fear, even if it was through a child's drawing. He glanced up at Lila, who was still staring out the window, her expression unreadable. Marcus knew better than to push her for more information right now. She had given him a piece of the puzzle, and he needed to handle it with care. "Thank you, Lila," he said softly, folding the paper and tucking it into his pocket. "This helps a lot." Lila didn't respond, but her hand relaxed slightly, as if a small weight had been lifted from her. Marcus took that as a sign that she was starting to trust him, even if only a little. "I'm going to find the person who did this," Marcus promised quietly, "and I'll make sure you're safe." As he left the house, Marcus felt a renewed sense of urgency. The sketch might not have been much to go on, but it was something, a lead, however vague. He pulled out his phone and called Kate. "I've got something," he said as soon as she picked up. "Lila gave me a drawing. It's a figure, she called it a monster. I think it's the person who killed her father." There was a brief pause on the other end of the line. "A monster?" Kate echoed, her voice tinged with disbelief. "Yeah. It's not much, but it's a start. I'm heading to the precinct to see if we can cross-reference this with any known offenders in the area." "Good idea," Kate replied. "I'll meet you there. Maybe we can dig up something in the cold cases or unsolved reports that matches the description." When Marcus arrived at the precinct, he found Kate already at her desk, surrounded by stacks of files and a grim determination etched on her face. She barely looked up as Marcus approached, too focused on the task at hand. "Any luck?" Marcus asked, taking a seat opposite her. "Nothing solid yet," Kate admitted, flipping through a thick file. "But I'm going through old case files looking for anything that might match. If this monster has shown up before, we'll find it." Marcus nodded, pulling out Lila's drawing and placing it on the desk. The crude figure with red eyes stared back at them, an unsettling reminder of the horrors Lila had witnessed. "We need to consider the possibility that this wasn't the first time he's done something like this," Marcus said. "If he's been flying under the radar, there might be other victims out there." Kate frowned, her brow furrowing in concentration. "It's possible. But why target Lila's father? What's the connection?" "That's what we need to figure out," Marcus replied. "And fast." Hours passed as they combed through files, cross-referencing names and descriptions with Lila's drawing. It was tedious, painstaking work, but neither of them was willing to give up. Every detail, no matter how small, could be the key to cracking the case. Finally, Kate let out a small gasp, her finger tracing a line of text in one of the reports. "Marcus, look at this." Marcus leaned over, reading the report she had found. It was from a case 5 years ago, an unsolved murder in a nearby town. The victim had been a young woman found dead in her apartment. Her throat had been slashed and there were signs of a struggle. But it was the witness statement that caught Marcus's attention. A neighbor had reported seeing a man lurking around the building on the night of the murder. A man with a shadowy appearance and glowing red eyes. "Red eyes," Marcus muttered, his pulse quickening. "Just like Lila's drawing." "It gets worse," Kate said, her voice tight. "There have been other reports, similar descriptions in other unsolved cases. They're scattered across different towns, but the details match. A shadowy figure with red eyes seen near the crime scenes." Marcus felt a cold knot form in his stomach. And no one connected them before? "They were all written off as unreliable witness statements," Kate replied bitterly. "The red eyes were chalked up to imagination or bad lighting. But now we have Lila's drawing," Marcus finished. "It's not just a story, it's real." The weight of the realization settled heavily on both of them. This wasn't just a random killing. It was part of something much larger, much darker. And the monster Lila had seen might be responsible for more deaths than they had initially imagined. Marcus's mind raced, trying to piece together the puzzle. Who was this killer and why was he targeting these victims? What was the significance of the red eyes? And most importantly, how could they stop him before he struck again? As he stared at Lila's drawing, the figure's red eyes seemed to bore into him, a chilling reminder that time was running out. The monster was still out there, lurking in the shadows, and Marcus knew they were getting closer to a confrontation. But as they inched closer to the truth, one question loomed larger than the rest. When the time came, would Lila be able to face her fears and help bring the monster to justice? Marcus didn't know, but he was determined to find out. Chapter 5. The Final Confrontation. The afternoon sun was beginning to dip below the horizon, casting long shadows across the precinct as Marcus and Kate prepared for what they both knew was going to be a long night. The weight of their discoveries hung heavy in the air, a dark cloud of anticipation and dread. They were close, so close to uncovering the identity of the monster that haunted Lila's nightmares. But close wasn't enough. They needed proof, and they needed it now. Marcus stared at the board on the wall, where they had pinned up photos, maps, and Lila's haunting drawing. The connections between the unsolved cases were becoming clearer, forming a web that centered on one elusive figure. But there was still one critical piece missing. Who is he? Marcus muttered under his breath, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the board for the 100th time. What's his connection to James Harmon? Kate, sitting at her desk with a stack of case files in front of her, looked up. We've checked Harmon's financials, his work history, his personal life. There's nothing that links him to any of the other victims. No commonalities, no overlaps. But there has to be something, Marcus insisted, his frustration boiling over. This guy doesn't just pick his targets at random. There's a reason he chose Harmon, just like there was a reason he chose the others. Kate opened her mouth to respond, but before she could say anything, Marcus's phone rang. He snatched it off the desk, his heart skipping a beat when he saw the caller ID. It was the social worker. Detective Kane, he answered quickly, his voice taut with tension. Marcus, it's Lila, the social worker said, her tone urgent. She's been asking for you again. But this time she said something. Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. What did she say? She said he's coming, the social worker replied, her voice shaky. And she's terrified. Marcus, I think she knows something important. Marcus felt a cold chill run down his spine. Where is she now? She's here with me, but the line suddenly went dead, cutting off the social worker mid-sentence. Hello? Hello? Marcus shouted into the phone, but there was no response. The call had been disconnected. What's going on? Kate asked, alarmed by the look on Marcus's face. Lila, Marcus said, his voice tight. She said he's coming. And now the call just dropped. We need to get over there now. Without another word, Marcus grabbed his coat and bolted for the door, Kate right behind him. They raced to the car and sped through the streets, the city blurring past them as Marcus's mind raced with fear and determination. If Lila was right, if the monster was coming for her, then they had to get to her before it was too late. When they arrived at the social worker's house, the door was slightly ajar. Marcus's heart sank as he exchanged a tense glance with Kate. He drew his gun and pushed the door open, stepping cautiously into the darkened hallway. The house was eerily silent, the only sound the creak of the floorboards under their feet. Marcus moved swiftly, his senses on high alert as he made his way toward the living room. He could feel the tension in the air, a palpable sense of danger that made the hairs on the back of his neck stand on end. As they entered the living room, Marcus's worst fears were confirmed. The social worker lay unconscious on the floor, a dark bruise forming on the side of her head. But there was no sign of Lila. Lila? Marcus called out, his voice echoing through the empty house. Lila, where are you? No response. Marcus's chest tightened with panic. He had promised Lila that he would keep her safe, and now she was gone, taken by the very monster she had feared. Kate knelt down beside the social worker, checking her pulse. She's alive, but barely. We need to call for backup. But before Marcus could respond, a noise from the back of the house caught his attention. A faint sound like the creak of a door opening. He signaled to Kate and they both moved toward the sound, their guns raised. As they approached the back door, Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. He could feel the presence of the monster closing in, the shadowy figure from Lila's drawing coming to life in his mind. He knew that whatever was waiting for them beyond that door, it was dangerous, deadly. With a deep breath, Marcus kicked the door open and they stepped out into the backyard. The setting sun cast long shadows across the yard, turning the world into a patchwork of light and darkness. Marcus's eyes scanned the area, searching for any sign of movement, any indication of where Lila might be. Then he saw it, a figure standing at the edge of the yard, partially hidden by the trees. The figure was tall, dressed in dark clothing, and his eyes glowed red in the fading light, just like in Lila's drawing. "Police, stop right there," Marcus shouted, his voice firm and commanding. The figure didn't move, didn't react. It was as if he was waiting, biding his time. "Drop your weapon and step forward," Kate ordered, her gun trained on the figure. But instead of complying, the figure turned and bolted into the trees, disappearing into the darkness. "Damn it," Marcus cursed, taking off after him. Kate followed, the two of them tearing through the underbrush, the branches whipping against their faces as they pursued the fleeing figure. The forest was dense, the shadows thickening with every step they took, but Marcus was driven by a single, unyielding thought. He had to catch this man. He had to save Lila. They followed the figure through the trees, their breaths coming in short, ragged gasps. The ground was uneven and the darkness made it difficult to see, but Marcus pushed on, his mind focused on one thing: catching the monster. Finally, they burst into a small clearing and Marcus skidded to a halt, his gun raised. The figure was there, standing in the center of the clearing, his back turned to them. But something was wrong, something felt off. "Turn around," Marcus shouted, his voice echoing through the clearing. Slowly, the figure turned and Marcus's blood ran cold. The man's face was obscured by a mask, a twisted, grotesque thing that only added to his terrifying appearance. But it wasn't just the mask that sent a chill down Marcus's spine. It was the way the man stood, so calm, so composed, as if he had nothing to fear. And then Marcus saw it, a small, terrified figure huddled at the man's feet. "Lila, let her go," Marcus demanded, his voice laced with desperation. The man didn't respond. Instead, he reached down and grabbed Lila by the arm, pulling her up to her feet. Lila's eyes were wide with fear, tears streaming down her face, but she didn't make a sound. She was too scared to even cry out. Marcus's hand tightened on the trigger. "I swear to God, if you hurt her." The man finally spoke, his voice low and distorted by the mask. "You're too late, detective. You can't stop what's already been set in motion." Marcus's heart pounded in his chest. He knew he was running out of time. If he didn't act now, Lila's life would be forfeit. But before he could make a move, Kate stepped forward, her voice steady and strong. "You're not getting away with this," she said. "Let her go and maybe we can work something out." The man chuckled, a low, menacing sound that sent shivers down Marcus's spine. "You think you can bargain with me? You have no idea what you're dealing with." Suddenly, without warning, the man pulled out a knife, its blade glinting in the dim light. Marcus's heart leaped into his throat as the man held the knife to Lila's throat. "Stop," Marcus shouted, his voice filled with raw emotion. "Please don't do this." For a moment, the man hesitated, his grip on the knife faltering. And in that brief instant, Marcus saw his chance. He didn't think, he acted. With a swift, calculated movement, Marcus fired his gun, the shot ringing out through the clearing. The man staggered back, dropping the knife as he clutched his shoulder in pain. Lila broke free from his grasp and ran toward Marcus, her small body trembling with fear. Marcus caught her in his arms, holding her close as he kept his gun trained on the wounded man. "It's over," Marcus said, his voice cold and unyielding. "You're done." The man sank to his knees, his breathing labored as he looked up at Marcus, his mask hiding whatever expression lay beneath. But even in his weakened state, there was something in his eyes, something dark, something that made Marcus's blood run cold. "You may have won this battle, detective," the man rasped. "But the war is far from over. There are others like me. You'll never stop us all." And with that, the man collapsed, his body going. Chapter 6. The Aftermath. The man collapsed to the ground, his final words echoing in the silence that followed the gunshot. For a long moment, Marcus stood there, his breath coming in short, ragged bursts, the adrenaline still pumping through his veins. Lila clung to him, her tiny body trembling against his, and he could feel her heartbeat, rapid and frightened, matching his own. Kate approached cautiously, her gun still drawn as she moved to check the man's pulse. She knelt beside him, her expression a mix of grim satisfaction and lingering tension. "He's dead," Kate confirmed, her voice steady. "It's over." But as the words left her lips, Marcus knew that wasn't entirely true. The man's last declaration, that there were others like him, hung heavily in the air, a dark promise of more to come. The monster they had faced might be gone, but the shadow he cast was far from dispelled. Marcus looked down at Lila, her face buried in his chest, and felt a surge of protectiveness. He had saved her, but the cost of that victory was still unknown. What had this man been part of? What network of horrors had they stumbled upon? And how many more victims would there be if they didn't uncover the full truth? "Let's get her out of here," Marcus said quietly, his voice laced with a determination that masked the exhaustion weighing him down. Kate nodded, holstering her weapon. "I'll call it in. We'll need a team out here to gather evidence, secure the scene." As Kate made the call, Marcus carried Lila back through the trees, away from the clearing that had become a battleground. The darkness seemed less oppressive now, the danger past, but the weight of the unknown pressed heavily on Marcus's mind. He had promised to protect Lila, and in that he had succeeded. But there were larger forces at play, forces that threatened not just Lila but countless others. Back at the house, the social worker was being attended to by paramedics. She was conscious now, sitting on the edge of the couch with an ice pack pressed to her head. Her eyes widened when she saw Lila safe in Marcus's arms, and relief washed over her face. "You found her," she said, her voice thick with emotion. Marcus nodded, lowering Lila to the ground but keeping a protective hand on her shoulder. "She's safe now." The social worker reached out to Lila, her voice gentle. "Lila, sweetie, it's okay. You're going to be okay." Lila didn't respond, her gaze distant and unfocused. The terror of the night had taken its toll, and Marcus knew that the road to recovery would be long and difficult. But he also knew that Lila was strong, stronger than anyone could have imagined. She had faced the monster and survived. That alone was a testament to her resilience. Kate returned from making the call, her expression grim. "Reinforcements are on the way. They'll secure the scene and start processing everything. But Marcus, we need to talk." Marcus looked at her, reading the concern in her eyes. "What is it?" "This isn't over," Kate said, echoing the thought that had been gnawing at Marcus since the moment the man had collapsed. "We've only scratched the surface. There's more going on here, something bigger than we realized. We need to dig deeper, find out who else is involved." Marcus nodded, his mind already racing with the possibilities. The monster might be dead, but the battle was far from over. There were questions that needed answers, and Marcus knew that finding those answers would be the key to preventing more tragedies like the one that had befallen Lila and her father. For now, though, his priority was Lila. She had been through enough, and Marcus was determined to make sure she was safe, to give her a chance at some semblance of a normal life. He knew it wouldn't be easy. Trauma like hers didn't just fade away, but he also knew that with the right support, Lila could heal. "Take her to the hospital," Marcus instructed the social worker. "Make sure she gets the care she needs. We'll follow up with her later." The social worker nodded, her expression one of quiet determination. "We'll take good care of her." As Lila was led away, Marcus felt a deep sense of responsibility settle over him. He had promised to protect her, and that promise extended beyond tonight. He would make sure she had everything she needed to recover, and he would continue the investigation until every piece of this twisted puzzle was uncovered. Kate placed a hand on his shoulder, her voice steady. "We'll get to the bottom of this, Marcus. Whatever it takes." Marcus nodded, his resolve hardening. "Yeah, we will." As they stood together in the growing darkness, the sirens of approaching police cars and ambulances pierced the night air. The monster they had faced might be gone, but the hunt was far from over. There were still shadows lurking, still dangers to be uncovered. But Marcus knew one thing for certain. He would find those responsible, and he would bring them to justice. For Lila, for her father, and for all the others who might still be at risk. The battle wasn't over, but neither was Marcus Kane. The end.